What if what you feel is not that you are breaking, but that you are waking up? There is something no one tells you when you suddenly stop wanting what you have always wanted. No one warns you about that morning when you wake up and look at your life, that life you built with so much effort, with so much sacrifice, and you feel absolutely nothing. Not sadness, not anger, nothing. A void so clean, so silent, that it is more frightening than any storm. And the first thing you think is, something is wrong with me. But what if that were not true? What if that void you fear so much was, in reality, the most honest signal your psyche has sent you in years? Stay. Because what I am going to tell you today will change the way you interpret everything you are going through. We have spent our whole lives hearing that motivation is the key, that if you truly want something, you achieve it. That discipline can overcome everything. And yet, there are millions of people who did exactly that. They wanted, they worked hard, they achieved it. And still, at some point along the way, something went out. Not all at once. Not with a door slam, but in the same way coffee cools down, without anyone noticing, until you touch it and it no longer burns. That is what has happened to you, isn't it? And the most disconcerting thing is not the emptiness itself. The most disconcerting thing is that you cannot explain it. There was no dramatic breakup. There was no catastrophic failure. Simply, one day, what used to move you stopped doing so. The project you were passionate about, the relationship you cared for, the job you gave yourself to, everything is still there, just as it always was, but you are no longer the same. And the question that tortures you, the one that repeats on a loop at 3 in the morning, is this: am I becoming depressed, or am I simply failing? Neither. What no one has told you is that there is a third kind of answer, one that does not appear in self-help books, one that popular psychology ignores because it is uncomfortable, because it cannot be summarized in 5 steps, because it does not sell courses. And it is this: losing interest in who you were may be the beginning of becoming who you truly are. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant and unsettling thinkers of the 20th century, spent decades studying something he called individuation, a process that, in simple terms, could be described as the journey of an entire lifetime toward oneself. Not toward the version of you your family likes, not toward the one that fits into the job market, but toward the one that is genuinely yours. And this process, almost without exception, begins with a loss. Jung observed something disturbing in his patients, that the deepest crises did not come when people failed, but when they succeeded, when they had spent years doing exactly what they were supposed to do, and suddenly, it stopped making sense, as if the life they had built were a perfectly tidy house, but built on the wrong ground. Can you feel it? That sensation that everything is in its place, and yet something does not fit. That is not a symptom of illness. That is psychic energy withdrawing from a place where it no longer belongs. Look, there is a distinction very few people know, and it can literally transform the way you interpret your own inner world. There are 2 types of loss of interest, 2 radically different types, and confusing them is one of the most costly mistakes you can make with yourself. The first is what we might call horizontal loss. It is boredom, routine, the lack of new stimuli, that feeling that you have been doing the same thing for too long and need a change of scenery. This type of loss has a simple solution. Look for something new, change your context, renew your environment. But the second is completely different, and it is much rarer, much deeper. It is vertical loss. Vertical loss does not ask you to change activities. It does not ask you to look for a new hobby or sign up for a master's degree. Vertical loss asks you to stop, to look inward, to ask yourself who you are beneath everything you have been doing. And that question, my friend, is terrifying. Because most of us have spent so long being what we do that we no longer really know what lies underneath. Are you your job? Are you your role in the family? Are you the person others expect you to be? Or is there something else? Something that has never had room to breathe? Something that has spent years knocking on a door you yourself have kept closed? Jung had a name for what happens when we ignore that call. He called it the dark night of the soul. He did not invent it. The expression comes from Saint John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic who described that period of emptiness and inner darkness as the inevitable threshold between an old life and a life that has not yet been born. Centuries later, Jung reached the same conclusion through psychology, that this void is not an accident, it is a transition. And now comes the part that makes people most uncomfortable, the part that creates the most resistance when you hear it for the first time. The void must not be filled, at least not yet, because the instinctive reaction to that void is to run away from it, to throw yourself into a new project, to start a relationship, to consume content endlessly, to move, so you do not have to stay still and listen to what that silence has to say. And although that brings short-term relief, it is exactly what prevents transformation. It is like changing costumes. The character changes, but the person remains the same. The dark night of the soul is that in-between space where an old identity dissolves and a new one has not yet taken shape. And there is something terrifying in that space. Yes, but there is also something extraordinarily honest. Because on that threshold, without the roles and without the masks, you can finally see who you really are. And what you find there is not always what you expected. Jung spoke of the shadow, that fascinating and sometimes frightening concept that refers to everything we have repressed in order to fit in. The emotions we were taught not to feel, the desires we learned to be ashamed of having, the truths we stopped telling so others would not pull away. The shadow does not disappear when you repress it. That is the most important thing you need to understand. The shadow does not disappear. It accumulates. It settles in the corners of the unconscious and operates from there, silently and effectively, sabotaging the relationships that matter most to you, undermining the projects that excite you most, creating that underlying restlessness you cannot name but that is always there. Have you ever reacted disproportionately to something small? Felt anger or fear that did not match the situation? Often, that is not irrationality. It is the shadow speaking. It is a part of you that has been ignored for a long time and in that moment found a crack through which to come out. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming a person with no filter who says everything they think and acts without consequences. It means recognizing those parts, looking them in the face, asking yourself where they come from and what they need, because only what is looked at can be transformed. What is avoided remains. And here we reach the core of everything I want to tell you today. Losing interest in your current life may be your psyche's way of telling you that there are parts of you that have been living in the shadow for too long. Parts that were sacrificed to build that functional life, that coherent image, that acceptable person. And now, from the depths, they are claiming their space. Not with screams, not with drama, with silence, with indifference. With that emptiness, you interpret as failure, and that is actually an invitation. So the question is not, how do I recover the motivation I lost? The right question, the one that changes everything, is this: what part of me has been trying to speak for a long time, and I have not allowed it to? Think about it for a moment. There is something you liked doing as a child that at some point you stopped doing because it was not practical, or because someone told you that you had no talent, or simply because life absorbed all the available space. There is something you think about when you are not thinking about anything. There is something that creates in you a strange mixture of attraction and fear, as if it were forbidden territory that you nevertheless recognize as your own. That is not an irrelevant fantasy. That is a clue. Jung believed that the process of individuation, that journey toward authenticity, is the most important task of the second half of life. Not career, not family, not social success, becoming who you truly are. And that inevitably requires letting previous versions of yourself die. And this is where things become truly interesting, because dying, in psychological terms, hurts just as much as in any other sense, even though no one dies, even though everything remains standing. Because what dies is not your body or your material life. It is an identity. It is a way of understanding yourself that no longer serves you, and saying goodbye to that, even if it is necessary. even if it is liberating, hurts. There is a metaphor that seems absolutely precise to describe this. Think of a snake shedding its skin. The old skin does not simply disappear. The snake has to go through a period of vulnerability, exposure, and friction until the new skin is formed enough to protect it. During that time, the snake is slower, more fragile, more sensitive. You, right now, if you recognize yourself in what I am describing, are shedding your skin. And the worst thing you can do is try to cling to the old one. So what do you do with all this? How do you navigate that transition without getting lost in it? First, and most difficult, learn to tolerate the void without filling it immediately. This goes completely against everything today's culture asks of you. We live in an age designed so that you do not have even a second of silence. Every time you stay still, there is a screen, a notification, a stimulus waiting to occupy that space, and that is no accident. Silence is the territory where transformation takes place, and that, for certain economic interests, is dangerous. Second, start observing what generates an authentic response in you, not what should excite you according to who you are on paper, what truly excites you. Sometimes that response is small, almost embarrassing. A conversation, a book, a moment in nature, a type of work you always dismissed as not serious enough. The psyche speaks in whispers before it screams. Learn to listen to the whispers. Third, give yourself permission to be contradictory. The identity you are leaving behind was probably very coherent, very predictable, very understandable to others. The one that is emerging may not be yet. It may create confusion in you and in those around you. That does not mean you are wrong. It means you are in process. And fourth, perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, do not explain this to everyone. There are certain transformations that need darkness in order to grow. Like seeds, if you bring them into the light too soon, before they have taken root, they dry out. There are people in your life who, even if they love you, have an unconscious interest in you remaining the same. Because if you change, something in the dynamic with them will also have to change. And that makes them uncomfortable. And that discomfort will be expressed, sometimes without them realizing it, as questioning questions, jokes that minimize what is happening, or concerns that are actually resistance. Protect what is being born. There is an enormous difference between being lost and being in transition. The one who is lost does not know where they are going and is afraid to look at the map. The one who is in transition also does not yet know where they are going, but has understood that the path itself is the answer. That inner movement has its own logic, its own rhythm, and that forcing it prematurely is as useless as trying to speed up digestion. Jung did not promise that this process would be comfortable. He was too honest a man for that. What he did say is that the people who went through it reached the other side with something that cannot be bought or learned in any course, an authentic relationship with themselves. And that, in a world full of people who have been playing a role for decades, is something extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily powerful. Do you remember the question we began with? What if what you feel is not that you are breaking, but that you are waking up? Well then, the answer depends on one thing only: what you decide to do with that void. You can fill it. You have an entire world designed to help you not feel it. You can keep moving in the same direction, convincing yourself that motivation will come back on its own, that this is just a phase, that you only need a vacation, and maybe it will work for a while. But that silence you now hear will still be there, because it does not disappear when you ignore it. It only grows deeper. Or you can do something much harder and much more valuable. Stay still. Listen. Ask yourself what part of you has been waiting in silence, patiently, for you to have the courage to look at it. That part is not abandoning you. It is waiting for you. And the version of you that emerges from that encounter, the one that has crossed the dark night and looked at its own shadow without turning away, that version resembles nothing you have been before. Because, for the first time, it resembles what you always truly were. If you made it this far, you already know something most people do not know. That emptiness is not always a sign that something is missing. Sometimes it is the sign that something, at last, is beginning. If you made it to the end, comment, "I made it," and I will personally reply to you. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to become part of this community and leave a like if you enjoyed it.